Okay, so now we're doing our setup row. Check the pattern and see how many stitches the pattern requests for your size you to knit. In my size I'm knitting 24 stitches, so I've just knitted 20 here. I'm going to knit 4 more. And now it's telling me to place a marker. The way that you place a marker is super simple. You just grab a stitch marker. You could use one of these or you could use a removable one, whatever works for you. Some people even use little loops of yarn. But you can pop that on your right hand needle, leave it there, and then just knit past it. It's as easy as that. And then throughout this setup row, you'll be asked to place several markers to indicate where the raglans are. You do it all in the same manner that we've done. And then in future rows, all you need to do when you get to the stitch marker, instead of knitting or anything like that with it, you just slip it from one needle to the other. So if I just show you, if I just back up a little bit. So say I'd got to here, I just knitted along, I'd reached my stitch marker and it's on this needle. All you do is just pop your right hand needle into it, slip it on, and then just continue working across the row. It's really, really easy. Right, so I finished my setup row and we're going to now move into the short rows. So I've got my pattern here that I'm going to refer to. The first short row, it includes both raglan shaping but also the short rows. So it can be a little tricky to get your head around at first, but it's very simple once you take it slowly. The instructions are actually the same for all of the sizes, so you can follow along with what I'm doing. Okay, so the first instruction is to knit one. And then the next instruction is to M1L, which means make one left leaning. The way that you do this is you're increasing a stitch essentially. The way that you make an M1L is you go into this little bar between your stitches. Do you see? You've got those little bars there. The top one, you're lifting up with your right hand needle. And then with your left hand needle, you're going into the front of the stitch like that. Well, front of the loop, so to speak. And then to sort of take it off the needle, you're gonna knit into it, but you'll knit into it from the back loop. So I'm just gonna put my right hand needle through the back and knit into the back of the stitch. And that's a new stitch now. So it was just a little bar and now we've created a new stitch, and that's a left leaning increase. So I'm going to follow the pattern now and it's going to say knit to one stitch before the marker. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Okay, so here I am. I've knit to one stitch before the marker. And again, we're going to make an increase now. This one they call M1R, which means make one right leaning. So for this one, you go into the stitch, well, the little loop between your two stitches. So you see, you can get that little ladder there. Going into that top loop, and with your left hand needle, you're slipping it on from the back, like that. And then to knit this new stitch off the needle, you enter into the front. So I'm just going to loosen it there we go. So I'm just knitting into the front of the stitch, and there we go. That's a new stitch that we've just created. That's one increased. Then we're going to knit one, slip the marker. So if you remember, I talked about slipping markers, just slipping it onto this needle, easy as that. And then it's asking me to knit one and make more increases. Now I'm going to work the rest of the row until we get to the bit where we encounter what they call W and T. That's a short row instruction. Once I get to that bit, I'll show you what to do. Okay, so I'm nearly done with my first row of short rows. I'm just going to finish off now, and I'm very close to the instruction where it's going to tell me to wrap and turn. So all I need to do is just knit these two stitches first, and now it's saying wrap and turn. So a wrap and turn is something that is always used in a short row, or at least a traditional style of short row. The thing you do when you're wrapping and turning from the right side is you slip the next stitch onto your right hand needle purlwise, like that. Then with your yarn at the back, you're bringing it round to the front, then slipping that same stitch back onto the left hand needle, like that. Then bring your yarn to the back again. That's considered a wrap. And now this is your turn. You've turned the work, we're ready to work from the wrong side. So I'm going to show you all the same techniques that we've just used on the right side, on the wrong side, because they do differ slightly. Okay, so now I'm on the wrong side of the fabric. This is row 2 of the short rows, which all of the things that they're asking you to do is worked on the wrong side of the fabric. So first instruction for short row 2 is purl back to the beginning of the round. I've just purled to the beginning of my round, just like the pattern suggested, and I've got my little beginning of the round marker here. I've actually used a different colour to the rest of my markers just to indicate it. Can be useful, it's not necessary if you don't want to. Okay, so the next instruction is to purl 1. So there's my purl, and then it's asking me to M1 RP, which means make 1, right leaning, purl, and purl it. So again, we're going between the 2 stitches and you're picking up the loop between your stitches, yeah? So this one is right leaning, so we're going to go into it from the back, like that. Put it on your left hand needle, and then we're going to purl it. So it can be a bit fiddly. I like to kind of loosen up the stitch by giving it a little tug. And then yeah, just purl it off the needle, and then that's 1 stitch increased. That's your M1 RP. So now the instruction says to purl to 1 stitch before the marker. So I'll do that now. Right, so that's 1 stitch before the marker. So now the instructions say M1 LP, which means make 1, left leaning, and purl it. So this one, we're gonna find the little stitch between, well, the little loop between our stitches. We're going to enter into it with our left hand needle from the front this time. And now the next step is to purl that loop, but we're going to purl it from the back of the stitch. So you kind of have to fiddle around with it a little bit. There you go. So you purl into the stitch from the back, like that, and there's your new stitch. The instructions now tell me to purl 1, slip my marker, purl 1, and then we're going to do an M1 RP. So this one is we're going into that loop from the back of the stitch, if you remember, and then we're going to purl into the front of the stitch like this, and then purl 2. And this is where they're going to ask us to wrap and turn again. So wrapping and turning on the purl side of the fabric is slightly different to when you wrap and turn on the knit side of the fabric. So what you do is you leave your yarn at the front, just as it is already. Then you slip the next stitch onto your right hand needle, like that. You bring your yarn around to the back of the work, slip the stitch back onto your left hand needle. Now bring your yarn around to the front, and that's wrapped that stitch now. So that's your wrap part of your wrap and turn. And then you turn your work and you're ready to start a knit row again. So we're going to repeat that again on short row 3, and then continue to work those 3 rows 3 more times, and that's when the short rows will be completed for all of the sizes. Okay, so I've just been working my short rows and I've come up to a wrapped stitch. Now the pattern requires me to knit over that stitch, but you need to incorporate the wrap into the stitch that you're knitting over. So this is how you do it on the right side of the fabric. So with your right hand needle, you get the wrap and just sort of, I don't know, put your needle underneath it. Then with your right hand needle, you're also going to enter into the stitch that has been wrapped, like that. Then all you do is just knit the stitches together, a bit like a knit two together, I guess. You're just knitting the wrap with the knitted stitch, and the wrap is hidden now. Right, so I'm just on the purl side of my fabric, and I've been working the short rows, and I've just come across a wrap stitch that I now need to purl into. So the way that you do this on the purl side is to incorporate the wrap. You enter into the wrap from the back of the work, which is actually the right side of the work, but you enter into it from the back. Then you place that on your needle and kind of slip it behind the wrapped stitch, like that. So you can see that's my wrap and that's the actual stitch. Then you're going to purl two together. So the wrap stitch and the stitch are now incorporated into the same one, and from the right side of the fabric it's completely invisible.